He didn't have a suit on. Just a dark overcoat, wool scarf, and shoes softened by winter salt. No motorcade. No cameras. He walked alone through a quiet side street in Manhattan, head slightly down, hands in his pockets. It was December. Sharp cold in the air. But the kind of cold that makes everything feel still clean. Even Barack Obama wasn't there to be seen. Wasn't there for a photo op or to make a statement. He was there to buy a watch. Nothing extravagant, just something meaningful. A gift for a man he hadn't seen in decades, Mr. Allen, his 7th grade civics teacher in Chicago. The one who told a boy with shaky hands and a stutter that his voice would matter someday, even if no one else saw it yet. Obama pushed the glass door open. The chime barely rang, the store was spotless. Quiet. Expensive in the way that didn't need to announce itself. He stepped inside. Took one look at the display, narrow, elegant, and made his way toward it. He didn't get far. A man stepped out from behind the counter. Not rushed. Calm. His suit was sharp. His eyes sharper. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, eyes flicking briefly toward the coat, then the shoes. "We operate by appointment only. This isn't really a browsing space." Obama paused. Not surprised. Not angry. "I understand," he said quietly. "Of course," the man added, lips pressed into a smile that never touched his eyes. "There's a more accessible boutique just 2 blocks east. You might find something there." Obama nodded once. Looked past the man just for a second at the simple silver watch in the case. The one he had already picked online the night before, then he turned and left. The chime rang again. Softer this time. That he didn't say his name. Didn't correct the man. Didn't remind him of who he was. He just kept walking, not because he couldn't afford the watch, because he knew what it cost to be looked at and not seen. That he didn't sleep much the night before. Not from anger. Not even from frustration. But from something else, something heavier. That old, familiar ache that doesn't burn. It sits. Quiet. Just under the ribs. By morning, he didn't need to rehearse anything. He'd already carried those words with him for decades. The only difference now was that he was finally going to say them into a camera. Alone, the setup was simple. His study. The room where he had written 2 books. Where he had signed letters to grieving mothers. Where he'd once drafted a eulogy that left a church in tears, but today, no audience waited. He placed the camera on the shelf, adjusted the angle until it showed only his face, his chest, the edge of the desk. A lamp glowed softly off to the side. The books behind him didn't need titles. The silence was ready. He sat down. Looked into the lens. And began. "I want to talk to you about something that happened yesterday." His voice was calm. But not casual. It had the gravity of someone who's chosen every word. Who's lived every syllable. "I walked into a store. A luxury watch shop, here in Manhattan. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't dressed up. No security. I wasn't looking to be noticed." He paused. Looked down for a moment, then back up. "I was looking for a gift. For a man who changed my life when I was 12 years old. My teacher. Mr. Allen. He saw something in me before I knew it was there. Before anyone else knew it was there." He nodded slightly, as if remembering something that didn't need to be said out loud. "I wanted to say thank you. And I thought maybe, a watch. A symbol of time well used. Of faith kept." He folded his hands. Still calm. Still steady, but before I could get 2 steps in, a man behind the counter told me they don't allow casual browsing. That I should try somewhere else. Said it plainly. As if he were trained in the art of dismissal. He let out a breath slow and low. "I've been told worse. I've been looked through before. I've had doors closed politely and permanently. But this one felt like a reminder. Of something deeper." He leaned in. Not for emphasis. Just closer to the truth, they looked at my coat before they looked at my face. He let the silence hold that sentence. Let it land where it needed to. I didn't say who I was. I didn't feel the need to. Because that's the point, isn't it? It shouldn't matter. Another pause. No music. No edits. Just a man present, unflinching. I wanted to see how they speak to the ones they don't recognize. The ones who walk in without names, or suits, or stories the world has memorized. The ones who come in quietly, hoping for decency. His voice stayed soft. But it cut. If how you treat people depends on what you think they're worth, you've already said what you're worth. He opened a small box on the desk. Took out a modest watch. Nothing gold. Nothing gleaming. Just honest. I bought this instead. From a man who looked me in the eye. Who didn't ask what I did, or what I wore. Just said, "How can I help you?" He turned it over once in his hand. Then set it down. That store across town will never know what I was there to do. And I won't give them the satisfaction of telling them. I won't name the brand. I don't need to. They'll know who they are. Another pause. Longer now. As if he were speaking not only to them, but to someone younger, someone watching, listening, remembering. I don't spend my time where I'm not seen. He looked into the lens again. Nothing behind his eyes wavered. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't surprised. He was done. I don't need them to apologize. I don't need them to explain. I just needed you to know. And then the smallest movement. He reached forward. Pressed a single button, and the recording stopped. There was no headline. No logo. No dramatic intro. The video didn't appear on Barack Obama's official channel. It wasn't clipped for morning news or framed with a thumbnail that screamed "Watch this now." It simply appeared. 8 minutes. Titled only with a date. No music. No effects, just him sitting in his study. The warmth of a lamp behind him. And a silence too steady to be accidental. Someone posted it, no one really knows who. Maybe someone from his circle. Maybe someone who'd been there when it was filmed. Or maybe he uploaded it himself, quietly, anonymously, the same way he walked into that store. For the first few hours, it sat there with barely any views. A few hundred. A few thoughtful comments. Then something shifted, not suddenly, not like an explosion. But like a slow intake of breath across thousands of rooms. People started watching it late at night. Alone. With headphones. With lights off. It didn't trend. It didn't scream. It whispered, and for those who'd ever been told, "Not for you," it whispered something that felt like being touched on the shoulder after decades of being passed by. They watched him speak slowly. Calmly. With that same restraint he'd carried his whole life. And suddenly, they weren't just listening, they were remembering. A woman in Toronto paused the video halfway through, then opened an old shoebox and pulled out a rejection letter from a school that told her she might be better suited for another environment. A man in New Jersey showed it to his teenage son, not because it was about Obama, but because it was about dignity. A teacher in Missouri played it in class. She didn't tell the students what to think. She just pressed play and sat down. There were no slogans. No calls to action. But the words stayed. They looked at my coat before they looked at my face. I wanted to see how they speak to the ones they don't recognize. I don't spend my time where I'm not seen. Those lines weren't dramatic. But they landed hard. Not in the gut, in the memory. People started realizing. This wasn't just about a watch store. It was about them, about the mother who still gets followed in stores while shopping for school uniforms, about the boy who walks through the mall with his hands out of his pockets so no one accuses him of stealing, about the quiet girl who speaks with an accent and gets talked down to like she's 5. And for many, it brought something they hadn't felt in a long time, relief that someone finally said it out loud without needing to raise their voice, because the pain didn't live in shouting. It lived in the small moments, the half-second hesitation before the greeting, the sideways glance, the forced smile, the dismissive tone, moments that stacked up year after year until you started to believe maybe you really didn't belong. This wasn't a viral moment, that IT was a mirror, and in that mirror, people didn't see a former president, they saw themselves. The video made its way into inboxes. Not group chats, private messages. I think you'll understand this. This reminded me of that day at the hotel. I never told you this, but some forwarded it to friends. Some didn't, some just watched it again. And again. One woman, 72 years old, wrote a letter to her granddaughter after watching it. She had never spoken about the job interview in 1968 where they asked if she'd feel comfortable being the only black woman in the office. She never got the job, she never forgot the tone. Now she had the words. Others didn't write or speak at all. They just SAT'd in kitchens. On buses. In empty break rooms, letting themselves feel the ache they'd tucked away for decades. Not rage. Not even sadness, just the quiet recognition. This happened to me, and I thought it was just me. The brand in question didn't issue a name, but they updated their website, changed their tone, began training their staff on how to greet people equitably. But they couldn't change what had been seen. They couldn't rewrite the moment when a man walked into their store, a man whose face was on currency in other countries and was treated like a problem to prevent. Obama never mentioned them again, that he didn't have to, because the world had heard him, and more importantly the right people had heard themselves. 6 days passed. No press conference. No response from the brand beyond a thin paragraph about customer experience standards. No debates on television. Just quiet, and in that quiet, something happened. A letter arrived. No tracking number. No envelope with a logo. No PR firm's watermark, just a simple white envelope, neat, precise handwriting on the front, to Mr. Barack Obama. With respect. Inside a folded sheet of lined paper, torn neatly from a notebook. Slightly bent at the corners. The kind of paper used when someone doesn't plan to write something beautiful, only something true. That he opened it slowly, careful not to crease it more than time already had. The handwriting wasn't elegant. But it was steady. As if the person had rewritten it in their head a dozen times before putting ink to the page, and this is what it said. Mr. Obama, I work or worked at the store you visited. I'm not writing this on behalf of the company. I don't speak for them. I don't want to. This is for me. That I saw what happened. I was in the back, through the glass partition, organizing paperwork when you walked in. I didn't hear everything. But I didn't need to. The posture. The face he made. The way he moved toward you before you'd even reached the counter. I knew. We all did that. We see it often. It's subtle. Practiced. Polite, on the surface. But underneath it's cold. And it's fast. He decides who belongs before they speak. I've seen him help tourists with broken English and ignore locals in work uniforms. I've watched him smile at people in designer coats and dismiss others in a blink, but this time, it was different, because when you turned and walked out you didn't flinch. You didn't look back. You didn't even ask why. And that silence you left behind? It was louder than anything he'd ever said. For the rest of the day, no one spoke about it. Not directly. But we moved slower. We glanced more. We knew who you were. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that it didn't matter. Because it shouldn't take recognition for someone to be treated with basic respect. That I thought about saying something. At the time. After. But I didn't. I was scared. Not for my job, really just scared of stepping out. Of being the one to break the script. Of naming what we all pretended not to see. Then I saw your video. And I stopped pretending. You said you wanted to see how they treat the ones they don't recognize. I saw it too. From behind glass. I didn't speak then. But I'm speaking now, not to fix anything. Just to say, you weren't alone in that room. That I saw it. I felt it. I froze. And I'm sorry that no one should be measured by a coat. Not in 2023. Not ever. I've handed in my notice. Not because you left. But because I stayed silent. And I can't do that anymore. Thank you for the way you walked out. Thank you for the way you didn't name us. You let us do that part ourselves. This is me doing that I won't sign my name. Not because I'm hiding. But because this letter isn't about me. It's about all the times someone watched and finally, couldn't anymore. When he finished reading, Obama didn't speak. He refolded the letter. Not once. Twice. Flattened the creases gently. And placed it in the drawer to the right of his desk, the one where he kept things that didn't belong to public life. Only to private memory. He didn't write back. He didn't release a statement. He didn't need to, because some truths don't require answers, only room. And in the quiet of that moment, a letter written by a man who had once stood behind glass now sat in the open, unhidden. There are two kinds of silence, the kind that hides. And the kind that heals. This one did both. 2 weeks passed, not much had changed in the world. But something had changed in him. The letter from the store employee still sat in the drawer to the right of his desk. Sometimes he'd open it just to see it again. Not to reread, he already knew it by heart. But to feel the weight of it. The sincerity. The strange dignity in someone admitting they'd failed and still choosing to speak. It had been a long time since something moved him like that. Not because of the injustice. He'd seen more of that than he could count. But because someone who didn't owe him anything, had looked at themselves and told the truth, that meant something. And then, one morning, another envelope arrived, this one thicker. The kind of envelope that has weight even before it's opened, not from what's inside, but from who it's from. No name in the return address. But he knew. From the handwriting alone, block letters, a little shaky, confident in form but unsure in pressure. He recognized it the same way you recognize a voice in a crowd without turning your head. It was Mr. Allen. He opened the letter slowly, his fingers careful not to tear the paper. There were creases along the top, where someone had folded and unfolded it several times. The ink was uneven, but deliberate. Not poetic. Not polished. Just, honest. He read the first line and stopped. I don't want your watch, kid. He smiled. Of course that would be the first thing. You already gave me more than any gift you could buy. You gave me time in ways you probably don't even know. Barack leaned back, his thumb pressing gently into the crease of the letter, eyes moving slower now. He heard Alan's voice in his head as clearly as if the man was still standing in front of a chalkboard, coat on the chair, tie a little loose, eyes scanning the room like they could see through excuses. You remember that day you stayed after class to help me clean up? 7th grade. You didn't talk much. But you stayed. You picked up papers. You erased the board. That day, I saw it. What you were carrying. The hunger. The silence. The armor. That day, I said, your voice matters. But what I didn't say was this, I knew you didn't believe me yet. Obama's hand softened around the page. That day, he remembered the eraser. The dust. The quiet. He remembered not knowing why he stayed. Now he did. I heard about what happened in that store, the letter continued, didn't need to see the clip. Didn't need to read the article. I know you. I know that silence you carry when someone looks at you like you don't belong. I saw it in you before anyone else did. You walked out the same way you walked into my classroom, quiet, serious, with more in your head than you'd ever let show. The ink got darker halfway through the page, like the pen had been pressed harder. Don't you dare think that moment meant nothing. You gave everyone watching something bigger than a headline. You gave them a blueprint for how to carry themselves when someone tries to shrink them. And more than that, you reminded people like me that we were right to believe in you. Barack closed his eyes for a moment. This wasn't about a store anymore. It never really had been. ****. They looked at your coat, Alan wrote, but I remember when you didn't have one. You came to school soaked from the rain, books stuffed under your shirt. Still turned in your homework on time. Still raised your hand. Don't spend your time where you're not seen. But don't forget this either, some of us always saw you. And we still do. There was no, sincerely. No, best wishes. No dramatic signature, just, Alan. 2 lines, enough. Barack didn't say anything out loud. Didn't reach for a pen. He just folded the letter slowly, reverently, and placed it in the same drawer as the last one. 2 letters. From 2 different men. One from behind glass. One from the past. Both of them had seen what happened, and both had chosen to speak, not loudly. Not publicly. But completely, and that, he thought, was more than any apology from a corporation could ever mean. That he had gone to that store to buy a watch, that he had walked out with something better. A reminder. A return. A quiet circle closed. Time, after all, is not measured in seconds or dollars. Sometimes, it's measured in who stays with you even decades later. 3 weeks had passed, the letters were still in the drawer. Folded neatly, handled carefully, read in silence at least once a day, not because he needed to revisit them, because he wasn't done listening to them. Some words don't land all at once, they echo, they settle into the body over time like a song you hum before realizing it's been living in your chest for years. That morning, he woke earlier than usual. The house was still. The sky outside hadn't made up its mind, somewhere between gray and gold. He sat at his desk with a cup of tea gone cold, both letters spread out in front of him. 1 from a man who once stood behind the glass and watched in silence. 1 from the man who once stood in front of a blackboard and said, "You matter." And now, both of them had spoken, not to excuse, not to impress, just to tell the truth, and he knew that was enough. But it wasn't finished. He reached for a plain black envelope. One with no seal, no print, no message on the front. He placed the letters inside. Took a moment to press the air from it with his palm, then he stood. No suit. No tie. Just a dark coat and soft gloves. The kind of clothes worn by men who want to be warm and left alone. He left a note on the kitchen counter, "Gone for a walk." And then he walked, not quickly. Not with a plan, just forward. The city was still waking up, vendors were wheeling carts onto sidewalks. Shopkeepers rolled up metal gates. Buses rumbled slowly past like ships through fog, but he didn't look at any of it. He knew where he was going, not the store. He didn't need to see that window again. He had seen enough of that kind of glass in his life. Instead, he went 3 blocks west. To a little bookstore he'd visited years before, small, independent, imperfect, the kind of place with handwritten price tags and uneven floorboards, the kind of place that smelled like old pages and second chances. When he stepped inside, the bell above the door rang softly. A young man behind the counter nodded to him, not out of recognition, but respect. He nodded back. No words passed between them. He walked straight to the back, to a section marked, Biography/Memoir. Not the famous shelf. The one tucked into the corner, next to Education, where the dust gathered slower. He found it quickly. A thin book. No cover sleeve. Spine faded. Pages yellowed slightly at the edges. A name pressed faintly into the front, Allen. He had bought it once, long ago, when it was first published, a collection of essays on teaching, community, purpose. A book nobody reviewed. A book that mattered anyway. He opened the cover, slid the envelope inside. No inscription. No flourish, just presence. Then he closed the book, returned it gently to its place on the shelf, and stepped back. For a long moment, he stood still, not looking at the book, just letting it be there. Letting it live. He left the store without speaking. The bell rang again behind him, and the world continued. 3 days later, a girl named Maya, 16, quiet, soft-spoken, came into the store with a gift card from her aunt. She was looking for something for school. Something about leadership. Something that might help her understand why she always felt invisible. When she raised her hand, she wandered to the back shelf, pulled out a book called Allen because the spine had looked like it had been held. Because the dust was thinner. Because something about it felt like it had been waiting. She opened the front cover, and there it was. A black envelope. She looked around. No one was watching. She sat down cross-legged on the floor. Opened it, read both letters. Slowly. Twice. When she was finished, she didn't cry. She didn't post it online, she simply put the envelope back. Closed the book. Held it in her hands like it had weight that wasn't measured in pages. Then she walked to the counter and said, "I'll take this one." The clerk looked down, recognized the book, looked up. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." He scanned it, slid it into a paper bag, handed it over. Maya left without saying anything else, but the clerk didn't shelve another book for the next 10 minutes. He just stood there. Quiet. Thinking about the weight of things that no one sees, the letters kept finding people. A father who couldn't find the right words for his son. A teacher who thought of quitting. A student who didn't know her silence was worth anything until she read someone else's. No one took the letters from the book, they just read. Then returned, like pilgrims. Barack Obama never told anyone about the bookstore, never explained what he'd done, because he hadn't done it for anyone to notice that he had done it for the boy who walked into the classroom soaking wet, carrying hope under his arm. That he had done it for the man who once erased a board and waited for a hand to rise. That he had done it for the stranger who stood behind the glass and finally spoke. And maybe, most of all, he had done it for the girl who would one day open that book and find a letter that said, "I see you." He never needed the watch. That he gave them time, not measured in minutes, but in truth. In memory. In the silence that remains when you leave, and what you leave behind still speaks.